I bet that's right, yeah, school, yeah.
Ready?
It's ready as I'm gonna get.
All right, we're rolling tape.
Yes.
Who's Ben Benjamin in regards to Los Alamos and Trinity?
Ben Benjamin. I was a technician at Los Alamos in the technical photographic group and did a lot of technical things, photographic things at Los Alamos, and later at Trinity I helped set up the photographic system down at Trinity, and worked then for Ken Bainbridge, who was the test director. And they were interesting times at Los Alamos. And yeah, so that's in general who I am and what I did. But
Who's that guy?
well, that guy is Jim Shane. He was my buddy in high school, and he and I we were both interested in astronomy, and we made telescopes. And I had a 6-inch telescope and he had one, and we later made some 8-inch telescope objective mirrors, and because of that we later got into building some, we got word from the amateur group in Minneapolis that the Frankfurt Arsenal was looking for some people who could make roof prisms, a very special kind of prism for fire control instruments. And we figured we can build anything optically. So we got some glass, some very plate glass. There wasn't much optical glass available then. We were not at war yet, but we, the United States, were building fire control instruments for the British and sending a lot of so-called Lend-Lease hardware over there for their war effort. And so we actually built 2 roof prisms, very difficult. There was a 90-degree angle in glass that had to be within a tolerance of plus or minus 2 seconds of arc. Very difficult problem. They just couldn't get enough of them. So we built those, and through that effort and our sending these prisms to the Frankfurt Arsenal, we were asked to, a guy from the Chicago Ordnance District came out and asked us to work with Honeywell. He said it was our patriotic duty to go to work for Honeywell, who had been set up, they had been set up to do optics. They had to build a beautiful optical shop for them, and Honeywell didn't have anyone who was knowledgeable about manufacturing optics. So Jim Shane and I went to work for Minneapolis Honeywell. We quit school for a period and helped them get started with their optical shop. We made prisms for, we didn't make the very difficult roof prisms or Amici prisms. We made roof prisms for tank sites and various other gadgetry. And in a few months, all of our buddies were getting into I guess we went to war. And right after that, Jim and I quit Honeywell, and I think I've shown you the letter I got from them. And Jim went in the Navy and I went in the Army. And but we both stayed in the optical business. After the war, I went to work for an optical company in Pittsburgh for a little while before returning to Los Alamos and Sandia. So that's how I really got started in optics, and that's how I got to Los Alamos, because of having worked at Honeywell and built precision optics. They needed somebody, a few people at Los Alamos to do that sort of thing, and General Groves had enough pull. He got a lot of people out of the military, people with skills that they needed. And I was one of those, and selected under very mysterious circumstances. Didn't know where I was going or how, or it was a difficult period when sent me first to Oak Ridge, where I had no duty, just sit in the barracks.
Let's stop for just a sec. Let's relax. What'd you think? Oh, let's just lead into the whole Oak Ridge thing by another way. Were you drafted?
No, I joined the,
There we go. So you weren't drafted. Tell me what.
no, I joined the Army, and along with Jim Shane, my friend here, and he joined the Navy, and I joined the Army, and I was, since I'd done optical things, I was immediately sent to the Ordnance Department, where I was supposed to get into optical instrument repair and that sort of thing. But since I'd been in the ROTC and had a little military training, they never let me out of the basic training organization. Those guys said, gee, you know more about this than most people, and we want you to stay here and do the basic training. So I became a basic training instructor, and I never did get into any technical work in the Ordnance Department. And
Why'd you join the Army?
well, gosh, December 7th came along, and our people were attacked at Pearl Harbor, and many of my friends were joining, and Jim and I talked a lot about it, and we just decided that was what we should be doing. So we left the job. What I think we could have been deferred in that in the optical work we were doing at Honeywell, but that's what we wanted to do, and we did.
Let's go to a medium. Tell me a little bit about your reaction to the bombing of Pearl Harbor.
Well, I remember it very vividly, in that I was still associated with the university, and I was, on that Sunday morning, I was in the Student Union building, and the radio was on, and everybody was gathered around, and Pearl Harbor had been bombed, and of course everybody was outraged, and there was a general opinion, boy, those guys are gonna be sorry they did that. We're gonna whip them. In a couple of months, we'll have to surrender because we have such a Navy. We didn't realize at that time that our whole Navy essentially had been sunk out there in Pearl Harbor, except for the aircraft carriers. So the reaction was, we got to do something. We got to get with it. We got to get into this. And
did it piss you off?
oh yeah, yeah,
Tell me. I'm more interested in kind of the emotional reaction that Ben had, not necessarily the general.
yeah, yeah. Well, I was of course pissed off and ready to join the military right now, but I didn't. I waited. I'd forgotten the timing sequence, but it wasn't long after that I joined the Army, and and then went into the ordnance field and thought I was going to be doing some instrumentation work, but became a drill instructor, which was a good job too.
Okay, I'm part of the show is I want to try to grab a hold of people's reactions to what was going on in Europe, and then the bombing of Pearl Harbor, which really plunged us into the war. So that's why I'm fishing in those waters.
Okay.
So, when I talked to Walt, he said Hitler was a madman. And those are the kinds of things I'm looking for right now. What did you think in general? I mean, what was your reaction to what was going on in the world?
Well, I was, of course, outraged at the attack. It was a surprise attack, and I listened carefully to President Roosevelt, his speech where he announced we were in a state of war with the Japanese Empire, and it was a very emotional period. And of course, my first thought was, gee, I got to get in the military. I got to do my part here. Even though I was sort of doing my part at Honeywell, but at that young age, one wants to get into the, you don't think of the consequences. You think of, I got to get in there and do my part and get in the military.
What did you think of the sneak attack? Did you think it was cowardly, or what words would you use?
Oh yes, very much so. Cowardly attack on.
Okay. I'll
on
need
our
that as
people.
kind of a complete statement then.
Okay, yeah.
So
You need it as a. I see. Yeah, one of my first thoughts was, of course, what a cowardly attack to make, just like the Japanese would do. And so, yeah, I was outraged. I was ready to join the military immediately. So.
What do you think of Hitler? How would you describe Hitler in your terms?
Well,
or Nazism or whatever.
yeah, we knew, of course, had been read all the accounts of what he had done since '39 and how he was obviously attempting to take over all of Europe for the Third Reich, and he was, of course, a completely berserk dictator as far as we were concerned. And yeah, of course, and the work we were doing was to send weapons to the British so they could do their part in fighting him. And I think we all knew that it was just a matter of time and we'd be in this, we'd be in the war.
Yeah.
So, yeah, Hitler was, of course, the enemy even then, even though we weren't at war. But, yeah, we all felt, I felt, that he had to be defeated, and realized it was just a matter of time before we'd be in the war against him. Of course, at that time, the Russians were still his ally, and that was a tough group of allies. The British, or the Russians, the Germans, and the Italians were allied together, and well, that was a very difficult group to fight, although at that time, hell, we were certainly good enough to handle all of those countries.
Tell me, let's go back to the wine. Let's get back onto your story. A little less table. There we go. So you wound up on this secretive trip.
Yeah, from Carnegie Tech, where I'd been going to school in the Army Specialized Training Program. Graduated there, and very mysterious circumstances got sent to Oak Ridge, Tennessee. Nobody would tell me what I'm going to do at Oak Ridge, but that's where I was sent. And arrived there, and it didn't help a whole lot because they put me in this barracks, and Master Sergeant said, "Now, when I get ready to talk to you," he says, "I'll send for you over here." He said, "You just make yourself at home here and hang out in the barracks or over in the PX, and be around here, be close by, because I want to see you soon." And I tried to get from him, what's going on? All these guys in this barracks get up early in the morning and they leave here, and nobody will tell me anything about what's going on. And I got to know what's going on. Where are you going to send me? What am I going to do? He says, "When I get ready, I'll tell you all about that. You just stay around close by." And so I did that, and even went back to his office and tried to get information from him, but he was, like most sergeants in the Army, he wasn't very communicative. He talked to me when he wanted to. But so he called me over one day and said, "Okay, you get your barrack bag packed and get ready to travel." "Well, where am I going, Sarge?" He says, "I'll tell you that when you leave." He said, "Don't worry about it. It's classified information." I said, "Well, I got to know where I'm going." He said, "No, you don't." Yeah. So, and then when I did actually get ready to go, and they were going to send me down to the train in Knoxville, he still wouldn't tell me. He says, "Your travel orders are in this envelope." And he says, "I don't want you to open these until you get 2 hours out of Knoxville." He says, "Then you'll find directions on what you're supposed to do." So I was traveling alone, and very difficult circumstances. And well, let me back up a bit. I'd gone over to see the first sergeant again to find out what the hell is going on. And he wasn't in. So I started talking to his clerk, private, or PFC, and I said, well, this is tough, you know, I'm going to be leaving here, I don't know where I'm going. He said, well, he said, I'm not supposed to do this. He said, but I'm going to tell you. And he showed me the travel order, which said, Lamy, New Mexico, and vicinity. He said, you're going to go to Chicago and then get on the train and go down to Lamy, New Mexico. And I didn't know where, I'd heard of New Mexico, but I'd never heard of Lamy. And so I went and finally found a map of New Mexico. Lamy is hardly, if it's a detailed map, you can see Lamy, because there was nothing but a railroad stop for Santa Fe, which I didn't know then. So I was perplexed and worried, and but got on the train, had a nice trip to Lamy, and when I got off in Lamy, there's nothing at Lamy, or there wasn't then. There was a general store and a depot. There wasn't anyone there, but I had this in my orders was a telephone number. When I got to Lamy, I was to call this number, which I did, and they said, stay there, we'll be out, pick you up. So I wandered up and down the platform there and talked to the guy in the general store, and pretty soon a black Buick came with two guys dressed as civilians in there, young guys. Well, it turned out after they picked me up that they were indeed GI soldiers just like myself, but they were trying to hide that fact, and it was not a military vehicle, it was a black Buick. And they took me to Los Alamos, and during the trip they conned me a little bit. They said, we're going up to this special place in those mountains, pointing to the Jemez. And they said, we work inside the first fence. There's 3 fences, they said. And you're going behind the 3rd fence. And they said, nobody will ever see you again. And they gave me this line that I finally realized was, they were pouring it on pretty heavy. And but it was an interesting, and then to get up there and see the installation up there, and
well, let's back up just a little bit. Kevin, the medium, please. And okay, start in detail getting off the train at Lamy. What were you thinking? What did you do? What, you know?
Well, I think I'd been looking forward to, I knew I was going to get off at Lamy after opening my orders and reading all this stuff. And so I was just kind of looking forward to Lamy, as it must be more than is shown on the map. But I got off there, and there wasn't anybody there. I think I was the only person to get off the train, as I recall. And so I wound up in the general store, and there was one guy in there, no customer, you know, so I didn't say anything to him because I wasn't supposed to say anything to anyone. But I did telephone the telephone number that was given to me, and after about an hour, these guys showed up, and I was by that time real concerned about what in the world is going on here. This is not like any military installation I'd ever gone to, and I'd been in the Army a while then, and been to Aberdeen, Maryland, been to Santa Anita, California, and Fort Douglas, Utah, and various places. So I wasn't a raw recruit, but this was very unusual. So, well, it wasn't long that problem was resolved when I got up to Los Alamos.
Well, what did you think when these guys pulled up in this black car? I mean, you told me you were sitting on the front steps of the...
Yeah, I was on the front sitting there, and these can't be the guys. There's got to be some GIs going to pick me up, or a military vehicle at least. I don't know who these guys are. But the guy rolled down the window and said, "Are you Benjamin?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, come on, we're going." Okay, so. And then I got to looking at, there weren't too many young guys around that weren't in uniform in those days. So and of course they admitted they were, as soon as I got in, that they were in the Army, and they would take me to my destination.
So you had no idea?
No idea where I was going, or what I was going to be doing, or anything of that nature. Very difficult period for me.
And tell me about trying to pour it on in the car. Tell me
Well,
a longer show and do a special.
Trinity site. And so I've got a motion picture in at 24 frames the standard rate of these guys playing polo. And I had processed it there. We had tanks for processing motion picture film, and I still have that somewhere. I haven't looked at it for a year. I'm afraid it's all dried out and it'll come out in a lot of chips, but
Was it black and white?
yeah. It was a reversal film. There was a kind of film that you could...
Yeah, tighten up. There you go. Why does it look a little darker these days?
Sitting on the steps.
Oh, sorry, Michael. I'm sorry.
I'm
Let's start that. Okay, we're ready.
So I was sitting on the steps of the general store there in Lamy, and been there for quite a while waiting for these guys. They're waiting for some transportation. And this black Buick showed up with two civilians in it, which I knew couldn't be for me. I didn't deal with civilians. I dealt with military people. These guys pulled up right beside me and rolled down the window, and the guy said, "Are you Benjamin?" I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Okay, get in, we'll take you." And then they soon admitted they were military people, but in civilian clothes, and that I would find there's lots of people in the military who would be in civilian clothing at where I was going. So we got into various, I of course tried to get information from them, what goes on and up where we're going, and they pointed to the Jemez Mountain and said that's where we're going, and then we stopped in, we didn't get all the way, we stopped at El Nido, which was a roadhouse north of Santa Fe on the way up to Los Alamos. These guys had to have a beer, and so we stopped in there, and immediately after that, they started giving me a hard time. I'm going up there and I'll never be seen or heard from again because the place is so classified, and once you get inside the third fence, that's where I was going, that I'd never be seen again. Of course, I didn't really believe them, but I was a little hesitant about this. And as we got further along, their stories got more ridiculous, and realized these guys were just putting me on. And but the next day, I think it was the next day, I met my civilian boss, Dr. Julian Mack, who was the head of the group, the technical photographic group, and I was there to do some grinding and polishing of prisms. And it turned out I didn't do much of that because there was another guy there that got into it, and I had done other photographic things and optical things, and they just had all kinds of things they had to have done. So I didn't get into very much optical processing, but the next day I finally found out what I would do, where I would be working, and so forth.
So you had no idea that.
No idea whatsoever. I didn't realize I was going to be doing optical things. I didn't realize it was primarily a civilian organization, that I was one of many GIs, but they were all technical guys, and they could all had special skills that were needed up there. And as I think I said, reading in the interim, General Groves had enough pull. He seemed to have an ability to get anybody he wanted out of the Army and get them sent to Los Alamos. And that way they got the technicians and engineers. They had all the physicists they needed, but that was the way they got the technicians and engineers and other skills that they needed up there.
So you were an SED, right?
Right.
Okay, tell me a little bit about that.
Well, it was, I had a hard time understanding the fact that I was in the Manhattan District Engineers, and turns out that was just another code name for the group up there. And a special engineer detachment, of course, had no real significance, but it did. There was another engineering group up there, the SEDs, and the PE, Provisional Engineer Detachment. And these guys were the sort of the headquarters organization. They were the MPs and the cooks and the guys that did the headquarters sorts of things, non-technical guys. And there was a little friction between these two groups, as you might imagine. Here are the guys doing behind the fence with doing technical things, and here are the poor GI soldiers doing being cooks and bakers and MPs and so on. There was a little friction between these groups, and well, there was a hierarchy at Los Alamos. There were the GIs and there were the civilians. All of that wasn't particularly rosy either. We had some minor conflicts because of that. Here we are working beside a civilian who's making big money and has got his family there, and we're GI soldiers making very little money and can't have our family there, supposedly.
Okay, let's talk a little bit more about what you did exactly. I think we actually need to change a few notebooks here. Let's just not just talk up on the hill. I want to know how much you knew, and when did you know what was going on that you were building upon?
Okay, as to what I knew about the project and when I knew it, I knew absolutely nothing when I arrived there. I mean, it was, even having been at Oak Ridge, I never found out, I wasn't there long enough to find out what those guys were up to. I was in the barracks where they'd get up in the morning and leave, and I knew something very unusual was going on, because those guys get up and leave their bunks, and in a little while some maids would come in and make up the beds. Now, I'd been in the Army quite a while, and I had never heard of anything in the Army where maids would come in and make up the bed and clean up the barracks. But it became obvious these guys had a job to do, and they wanted to complete 8 or 10 hours out of them. They didn't want them doing military things, and so that remained a mystery. But I knew nothing about what was going on. From everything was compartmentalized. Everyone was told, don't discuss your job with anyone. Don't ask your guy sleeping next to you what he does. That's forbidden. And I want to know, or we want to know, anybody that asks you questions like that, we want to know about it. And so that was the atmosphere at the time at Oak Ridge, and of course at Los Alamos. So I didn't ask anybody at Los Alamos, but I was taken aside by my boss, right? I think it was the same day I met him. And he was very frank with me, and told me what was going on up there. They were going to build a weapon that could end the war. And we had the technophotographic group, and were involved in many aspects of the fabrication or the design of the weapon, and that I would be a part of it. And he went a little bit, he was a physicist, and went in a little into the physics, which I knew nothing about, and was snowed under immediately. But I did get into, I remember being, not long after I was there, I operated motion picture cameras, and I had a Mitchell camera, and they wanted some footage of some of the fabrication of lenses and high explosives, which they did out at S-Site, out of Los Alamos. And so I packed up a 35 millimeter Mitchell camera, lots of film and lighting, and went out to S-Site and met the guy I was supposed to talk to. And I was amazed. I'd seen machine shops, and I'd seen lathes and milling machines, and knew about them. But here was a guy machining high explosives, TNT essentially. And he had it in the lathe, and he was machining. Of course, he had a stream of water on it at all times, but I didn't realize at that time that you could do that with high explosives. But I remember setting up the lights on both sides and getting the camera up at the right angle so I could see this work in the lathe, and had various focal length lenses, unlike zoom lenses now, we didn't have that. But so I got all set up and turned on these big floodlights, and some guy came running down the aisle from somewhere. He said, "What in the hell are you doing with those? Turn those lights off." He said, "You can't have unprotected lights in here." He said, "Don't you see all this high explosive stuff around here?" Well, yeah, I see it, but I didn't know that. And so I had to stand down and go get some proper kind of lighting. And it was a learning experience, let's say that. So I did a lot of, not a lot, but I did some documentary photography in 35 millimeter, and then got into the pre-Trinity activities. When it was known we're going down to Trinity, we're going to have this test. We had a lot of instrumentation to build. I got involved in some of the very early oscilloscope cameras, which we had to build ourselves up there. Nowadays you go and buy one, but I made sketches and took them over to the machine shop and had these things built. And so I was involved not just in Trinity, but in some other activities up there.
What's an oscilloscope camera?
Well, an oscilloscope is an electronic instrument which allows you to essentially see an electrical signal, and it's particularly valuable in when you're timing circuits. When, for instance, when detonators have to go off all at the same instant within a microsecond or less, there are photographic ways to measure a microsecond, and there are now electronic methods of doing it. In those days, we couldn't resolve a microsecond, as I recall, on a oscilloscope, but we were getting close. And but you had to have where you had a one-shot event where you're torching off a detonator. You've got to have a picture of that event on the oscilloscope. And we hand-built these cameras, and I remember the lenses were very fast. They were f1.5 lenses. There were none made in this country at that time. But the purchasing group there had an order from our boss to get these f1.5 German lenses. They were a f1.5 sonar, and they were used on a Contax 35 millimeter camera, a beautiful 35 millimeter camera, the best in those days. But an f1.5 a lens that fast was very unusual in those days. But I remember them coming in from used camera dealers around the country in groups of 10 and 12 and so forth. We got a lot of f1.5 lenses and used them on these oscilloscope cameras.
What was it like doing the work up there? I mean, did you have to invent everything?
No, we didn't have to invent everything, but we had to get together lots of existing photographic equipment, and some things we had to build. As I say, the oscilloscope cameras was one of them, and we had there were enough people using oscilloscopes then, and doing photography with them. This was before Polaroid, so we used hard film and very fast. In fact, we super sensitized the film. We had a mercury vapor scheme of sensitizing, and that was part of our duty. I wasn't particularly involved, but the guys in our group did that, and the people who were taking these fast oscilloscope pictures came and got a film holder or two or three with sensitized film. They brought them back for processing in our lab, and I can remember lots of conversations in the outer part of the lab where these guys were either tremendously excited about what they had or down in the dumps because it didn't work out the way they thought it should.
But there was a sense of experimentation or something. I mean,
yeah.
Tell me that in a complete statement.
Yes, there was a sense of experimentation in that we saw lots of people from different labs show up at our lab looking for their oscilloscope pictures, which we processed, and we also, of course, did the sensitization, super sensitizing, I think it was called. And we had to come up with those techniques, and of course our boss was a real expert in the area of the photographic process. In fact, that was the title of a book he had written several years earlier, and which we all had handy there. It was very good book. But we actually had to build some cameras and put together lenses and film holders of various kinds, and we did a lot of that sort of thing. So we were all gadgeteers in a sense, and then at Trinity, it again became, everything had to be done so rapidly, and we didn't have the right equipment many times, and we had to fabricate our own stuff, and lots of make-do sorts of things that we did.
Put one arm up on the table. I feel like you're kind of
Oh.
losing you.
One, okay.
Yeah. So, S-site you were going to say, or?
Yeah, and so while working out at S-Site, it took several days to do this documentary, but guys were going into lunch. We went into the main area of Los Alamos for lunch, and some of the guys were going in. Instead of taking the vehicle I had, I said, hey, give me a ride. It was a nice day, and I sat in the back. There were 3 or 4 of us sat in the back of this pickup. We're sitting on boxes about, maybe a foot square or a foot cube, really. They were a cube. And we all sat on these boxes made of plywood, heavy boxes. And when we got to the mess hall, the guys jumped out, and I looked at those boxes, and I lifted the lid on one of them, and inside was a high explosive lens that had already been fabricated, put into a nicely fitting box. And in the back of this pickup, sitting outside the mess hall, was several hundred pounds of high explosive. Now that, of course, was strictly forbidden, but it gives you a little inkling of what the way people thought of high explosive. People who worked with it thought of it as nothing almost. Mm-hmm. And here it was at the mess hall, which if it had somehow detonated there, it would have killed everybody. Well, maybe not everybody, but would have killed a lot of people. Some interesting stories along those lines.
Yeah. Tell me another one. What else comes to mind?
Well, the story down at Trinity.
Let's save the Trinity
Save
stuff
the Trinity.
for the
Well, I had this one another one at Los Alamos. I've forgotten when it was, but old high explosives that were no longer needed, or were junk, or were to be destroyed, were put in a pit, and it was a common way, apparently, of getting rid of the explosives. Just put in this pit, and they burned it. You can indeed light high explosives and burn it, but when it gets deep enough and not spread out properly, it can detonate it and can detonate. And sure enough, one day at Los Alamos, out at S-Site, fortunately there's no one around, but this thing detonated. It was a pretty big explosion out there. I think that's when they formalized the destruction of high explosive a little more.
Tell me, yeah, actually it wasn't really New Age, it was just a really...
Rolling?
Yeah, go ahead.
Now, one of the more interesting things we did as GIs working in a real well-equipped photo lab is the fact that Sergeant Dabney said, or had a rule that we couldn't leave the hill, Los Alamos, except on special occasions, and we rotated the privilege of leaving on a 3-day pass, or even on weekends. We couldn't go every weekend. They didn't want a lot of GIs in town from Los Alamos. It was not the thing to do. The security people were going to see to it that we didn't do that. So it was very difficult to get a pass to go to town, although a lot of people were leaving at all times. You'd have to go down and fight with Dabney in order to get your pass. And so being a photographic organization, we decided we'll make our own pass. So we get our pass and take it into the lab and photograph it with 2 or 3 different emulsions so that we get the black and white and we get the photograph and so on. And we made our own pass. And from then on, our group was able to come and go from Los Alamos when we wanted. And I don't think Dabney knows to this day what happened. We kept that a secret of our own. But that was very convenient. And this pass, I'm not sure, is the is the one we use to get on and off the base, but it might be. And as you can see, this one has suffered a little in the years, over the years. It's
Yeah, let's
hard
start
to
that
read.
over again because we were
Okay.
keeping that framing so we can see it now.
Okay.
Say this is, I think this is one of those passes.
Yeah, so I think this is one of those passes. I think this is the one we use to get on and off the base, and it's in pretty bad shape, as you can see. It's suffered a lot over the years, but we photographed this and the reverse side, and we made our own pass, which got us on and off the base when we wanted. We didn't need to go fight for our pass down at the orderly room.
Do the close up, please. Nope, on him.
Oh, I'm sorry.
There we go. So you weren't, I mean, isn't this highly illegal? And the
Highly illegal, yeah, as I say. Now it can, I think the statute of limitations has run out. Dabney can't arrest me now, but and all of us in that lab did it. And one of the older guys, Curly Barr, he was in the SEDs, but he was older than the rest of us in the photo group there, and he was our mentor, and he was the one that suggested this, and we all followed his example, and we all made our own passes. Well, we made them in batches, I believe.
You weren't afraid of getting caught?
No, we see, in those days, Los Alamos, there wasn't much going on, and everyone there was very dedicated to the job, and we went in the lab at night a lot. Very often there were just a few of us GIs. Very often there were a lot of the civilian groups there, civilian guys, but GIs ran the photo darkroom. The guys that did the film processing were in our SED group. So it was our lab, essentially, and if we wanted to make these, we made them. Yeah, and we worried a little about getting caught, but what can they do, you know? So,
Yeah.
except tell us not to do that anymore.
What was the spirit like up on the hill? I mean, the spirit of working together?
Yes, a very, not so much working together as a complete dedication. I haven't seen it since anywhere, really. Everybody was so gung-ho to get this job done that it was amazing that everybody just worked. Well, as I say, came in at night. We didn't have to come in at night, but that's where we went nights. After dinner, we'd all wander into the lab, and some nights it wasn't all work. Sometimes it was a bunch of us just getting together, and but very often it was work. We were building equipment and processing film and doing our job. Yeah, it was a. I haven't, as I say, I haven't seen that kind of dedication since. It was well, there was a war on. People were being killed daily, and we were aware of it, and we were as a result dedicated and worked hard. And it wasn't just go and do this and we do it. We helped each other. I remember helping the other guys on their projects, and they are helping me. And it was a great spirit there, a great camaraderie that we had. And as a result, that project went rather smoothly, I think.
Tell me about your, not in detail about what you do, but tell me about what a work night was. I mean, so we can back up and you can help me understand a little bit better about the work that you did there. I mean, the number of hours, you know. So you could, what I'm looking for you to say is that we worked all day and all night. I mean, there wasn't any.
Yeah. Well, as to our working hours, there was a formal set of working hours from, I forgot what it was, but it was a standard work day, 8 to 5:30 or something like that, with some time for lunch. And but in our work, where we were assigned to do a photographic job at S site or one of the other sites around Los Alamos, we we didn't really pay much attention to that work schedule. If they were going to do something at 6 o'clock in the morning out there, we'd be there at 6 o'clock. And we were all sort of on our own schedule, and they tried to keep the military organization, tried to make a military group out of it. It just didn't work because people were sometimes gone for several days and couldn't tell anybody what they were doing, and sometimes we were staying out late at night doing our jobs out on the mesa, and so that didn't work. But it was a really dedicated group of guys, and we were all very gung-ho to get this job done. And we had some safety concerns. We were working with HE. I remember we had a meeting in Julian's office, and I was involved along with some of the other GIs in that we were working with high explosives, getting ready for Trinity and photographing with very high-speed cameras, photographing explosions of various kinds in the field. And there's a guy came around, I didn't know him, he was a civilian, he came around, he was introduced as a safety man, safety organization. And he talked a lot about various things, and Julian was, our boss, was getting a little antsy, and Julian finally said, well, he's got to go, he has another meeting somewhere, and this guy tried to follow up with how important the safety was, and Julian said, well, he said, I don't see it just like you do. He says, war is hell. He said, sometimes even people get killed. With that, he walked out of the meeting. And the safety man, he quit at that time, too.
Tell me about the sense of anticipation or anxiety or whatever to get this thing done. I mean, and you knew what it was, right?
Oh yes, our boss was very candid about what we were doing and what we were going to do and so forth. And so we knew what we were doing, and well, our work then, in the early days I didn't know, but as our work progressed and we took pictures of the manufacturing of the lenses, and we went out on the mesa, took pictures of all these various explosions, and we had these very high-speed streak cameras where we were helping with the simultaneity of detonators. That was a very important thing. With the implosion weapon, one had to have all the detonators go simultaneously. Yeah, it's a little difficult thing to do. In fact, a lot of people worked for long periods on that. But we had the camera that could resolve a microsecond and better. Just a streak camera didn't form images, it was just a streak camera, but if you, a rotating prism, the prism rotated several thousand revolutions a second, and so we got, that was the primary instrument for determining, do we have an electronic system that will detonate these things simultaneously? And so we did a lot of that, and so as a consequence, while we didn't know any of the physics, we sort of knew what was going on there. And of course, Trinity, we knew, was the big test.
Yeah, was there a sense of urgency in the air? Or, I mean, what?
Urgency? Yes, there was a sense of urgency that we all knew that we were looking for a weapon as rapidly as we could produce one. Because, as I say, our guys were being killed daily over in the Pacific and in Europe until, of course, VE Day, but we were aware of that, and we were all working, and I think there was an esprit an esprit de corps, really, and the guys knew that we might make a difference, a big difference, if we could get this thing done. And that was from the top, the physicists, on down. And this thing that you hear a lot about in retrospect of people looking at the moral implications of what we did is really all in retrospect. I think it's revisionism going on. We never heard any of that. Of course, we didn't hang out with the physicists who were at the heart of the project, but nowhere did anyone, my bosses, for instance, certainly didn't harbor those thoughts at that time. Our job was to get this done, to kill the enemy, and get the war over with. And while you hear, as I say, you hear a lot about the moral implications, it was our moral duty then to do the best we could to get this weapon completed in time to end this war. We knew that the Japanese would fight to the last person, and if we had to invade the Japanese islands, we would, as well as the Japanese, would lose thousands of people. And so I'm getting into the
No, that's fine.
wrong end of the,
No, I think that's a very important part of the show.
you know.
I think that, how can you retell history or restructure history
Yeah,
50 years
yeah.
later?
Because absolutely nobody that I knew talked in this way that people now talk about in retrospect. In retrospect, they talk about the moral implications, but
Well, do you think we're forgetting a little bit of our history here?
well, as I say, I think it's being revised some by people who write it now. But I think this will be difficult to really change because the story is well written, how Truman made his decision to use this weapon, and I think it still makes very good sense. I think he did indeed save many lives by using the weapon as he did. And I see it as a proper thing to have done.
You feel kind of proud you had a chance
Yes,
to
I
help?
do. You bet. I feel proud of it. I don't feel badly about it. Of course, I feel badly that so many of what was then the enemy had to die, but that's our people were dying over there too, and so many people will forget about about Pearl Harbor, the sneak attack, and the thousands of people who died there, and so I think it was very well justified.
Thank you. What else can we talk about? Why don't we stop for a second? Take a
Civilian, and I was military, and we both said, we got to get together. We got to, but it just didn't work out. He was a civilian, and I was a GI, and there wasn't a lot of mixing of.
Well, that's where I wanted to go. Why don't you put your arm back up? Give me the lean. You look so good. Go to the medium.
Okay.
How did it go between the civilian scientists and the SEDs?
Well, in general, the civilian scientists, of course, were the bosses, and speaking for my own group, and I think I speak for the others, there was a very good relationship. We all realized that our boss, Julian Mack, was very expert in his area, and we all looked up to him, and he was truly the boss, and we had a good relationship with him. Julian had his family there and lived in an apartment, and of course we as GIs lived in the barracks, and so we didn't associate in any way socially with him or any of the civilians really, or at least none of the guys in my group. And I've read some stories where GIs were associated with some of the physicists, but I certainly wasn't, and none of the people in my group were. So there was a little off-duty, there was a little friction, civilian versus GI. And it wasn't, GIs didn't usually talk about a civilian, they talked about a goddamn civilian. That's the way it was phrased up there in those days. And some guys talked about these 4F people and so forth, but that was a minor thing in the social activity up there, I think.
Did you ever talk with Oppenheim or meet those guys or hit up with Fermi or, brushed elbows with them in the canteen? Or?
I was, I think, a friend of Sir William Penny. He at that time was just Bill Penny, but he was the head of, I think he was the head of the British contingent and his office was right next door to our lab in Gamma Building. And when Julian wasn't there, we, the working guys, the technicians, would often go in and talk to Bill Penny and say, hey, we got this problem, what do you think? And he usually had an answer. Whether it was right or wrong, he usually had an answer. And I later worked pretty closely with him down at Trinity. He had a project that I did the technician work for him. So I was very familiar with him, and of course Julian, my boss, I was very friendly, and Berlin Brixner, who was Julian's sort of second in command, he was a good friend, and worked closely with him. But the physicist, Oppenheimer was, he was say hi, you know, you were down the hall and Oppie'd come along, you'd say hi, and he'd say hi. He was, but I never had anything to do with Oppenheimer or, now, Ken Bainbridge, who was the test director and a professor of physics from Harvard, was, I knew very well, and we went on, we talked a lot down at Trinity, and I didn't know him at Los Alamos, but knew him when we got to Trinity. And John Williams was his second in command. He was professor of physics from University of Minnesota, where I had gone. I didn't know him there, but John Williams was one of the scientists, and he later, when I got back to Minnesota and started back with my engineering, he gave me a job in the physics building, which I was very grateful for. But he, of course, we knew each other quite well by then.
Okay. You hit me onto a subject, and I almost have the answer that I want to get from you. I wonder if that's even accurate. You can stop for a second.
In the very early days of Los Alamos, well, let me start again. Los Alamos was originally thought of as a place where they would bring all the proper physicists together so they could work together, exchange information, and come up with a design for this weapon. This I have read in the interim. I didn't know it at that time, but it soon became apparent when they got there that they've got to have a lot of technicians and engineers to do this work. Some experiments had to be done in order to assure themselves that they were on the right track. And everyone was off in the Army or the military, and they couldn't get people. So Groves, being a general, was able to, and the priorities he had, he was able to say, I want to get people out of the military and assign them to my project, and he was given that permission, and he in turn sent people out to get the right guys out of the military. So there ended up, I don't know how many SEDs there were, but there were a bunch, several hundred. And so that's how that all started. And that's, as I say, I didn't know that at the time, but I've read it in the interim.
Well, but I'm looking for
That must have been his contribution.
roll tape, please. So that's the area I want to finish up with today's dialogue with. On that.
Okay,
Hold on a sec, we got a truck. Somebody coming in? Okay.
airplane maybe. Yeah, so the physicists quickly realized they needed people up there to do these experiments, and there was Oppenheimer and Fermi and those guys were the theoreticians, and they had to have some practical people who could build equipment, build experiments, and conduct experiments, and they needed a lot of them. And that's where we, mostly the military guys, there were a few civilians also who were not physicists, not nuclear physicists, but who came up to do their thing up there, guys that contributed a bunch, I think. And they could not have done it with just the physicists. It just wasn't possible. They could have designed on paper a weapon, and they did, of course, do that. And it was their design. I'm not trying to take away any of their the credit they should have. They, of course, did the primary designs, but they couldn't have built a weapon without some technicians and engineers.
Okay. I want you to say for me, and it's only if you agree, Oppenheimer and those guys could dream it up, but we had to make it work.
Okay, I'll say that.
Okay.
So Oppenheimer and the physicists could dream up the weapon, but they couldn't make it. We could. Did I say that right?
Try one more time.
One more.
Well, they could dream it up, but we had to make
They
it
could.
work.
They could dream up the weapon, but we're the ones that could make it work.
Yeah, that's it. Try that one more time for me.
You know. So Oppenheimer and the physicists were the ones who could dream up and design a weapon, but we were the ones that could make it work. They couldn't.
That's good. I think we're all right. What do you think? I mean, is that true?
Oh yeah, very true. And they realized it. They knew that. And Oppie, for instance, was a theoretician. He wouldn't know one end of a screwdriver from another. And so were his colleagues for the most part. They were good bomb designers. They were good theoreticians, but when it comes time to do some hardware, they were lost, and they needed some people to do it. Of course, there were some very good experimental physicists there too, and they did their parts, but there weren't enough of them. And there were some physicists who weren't nuclear physicists. For instance, my boss, Julian Mack, his expertise was in the photographic process, and he was a major force in getting the job done there at Los Alamos.
So give me that line again.
Well, starting with, there were the nuclear physicists, of course, were the heart of the project, but there were some other physicists there. For instance, my boss, Julian Mack.
No, I'm saying about Oppenheimer could
Oh.
pick it up.
Oh, that one, okay.
Now that you're a little...
Yeah, Oppenheimer could dream up a nuclear weapon, but he couldn't build it. We could.
We got it. Let's...
More words to say it.
Yeah, okay. What I want to do is just be real quiet. We're just going to record the sound in the room. That's enough. Thank you. Who's this?
That's me when I was stationed at Camp Santa Anita in California, and I was a basic training instructor at that time. But that's long before I was transferred from. I took a test here to see if I was qualified for the Army Specialized Training Program, which was where I was indeed, and I ended up at Carnegie Tech and stayed there at least a year in an engineering course. And I went from there to Oak Ridge and then to Los Alamos. Yeah, so those were that was a commercially done photograph by, forgotten the circumstances, but that's pretty bad. And this is it says War Department Special Engineer Detachment, issued at Los Alamos, and it's if this isn't the pass we used to get in and out of the post, it looked just like this. And this is the one we copied in the photo lab and made our own, so we didn't have to go and compete with the other GIs to get one of these once every 3 weekends. We just kept them in our wallet. That was, and that worked for a long time. In fact, we never got caught at that. So
Highly illegal?
Highly illegal, yeah. Well, let's see. Highly illegal? Nobody told us not to do that, but yes, I'm sure it was illegal to copy a pass and use it. Yeah.
Especially in Los Alamos.
So we were AWOL very often. We were downtown in Santa Fe, absent without leave. So, but with the military organization they had, it was hard to catch anybody at that because I couldn't tell Sergeant Dabney where I was, and he didn't expect me to. We were all compartmentalized for security reasons, and So it was very easy to go AWOL down there.
And tell me what an SED is, or what
An SED?
in general. Yeah.
What an SED is? Well, we called it, since we were in the Special Engineer Detachment of the Manhattan District Engineers, we referred to each other as an SED or a PED or a civilian or a scientist, and we were, in general, we were the technical Army group who was sent there to do the technician kind of work for the physicists. That's a general description of what an SED is.
Okay, good. Let's look at some more stuff here.
Okay, let's see. I don't want to go this way, I don't think. No, there's in here. This scrapbook was put together by my mother, and these are pictures that I've either brought home or sent home. And this is when I was at Camp Santa Anita in near Pasadena, California, where we had an ordnance replacement training center. And we did, these were in the field, where we took the recruits out to the field to complete their education, as it were. Let's see what else we've got here that's of any interest.
What do you think looking back at this stuff? It's 50 years. I mean, do you have anything to say after 50 years?
It's really great to look at this. I haven't looked at it in a long time. And it brings back lots of fond memories of things we did. And the dates, I tend to sort of forget them. And here it is in '42 when I left Minneapolis Honeywell Regulator Company, where I was doing optical fabrication. And I think I could go over to Honeywell now and say, hey, you guys, give me a job. This says you were looking for me to come back. And not sure that would work after 50 years, but it'd be fun to try. And I don't know how this got in the Duluth paper, but this is after, I don't know what the date is, but it was after Trinity, and I had gone home on furlough after much work at Trinity, and we closed up there rather rapidly, and my boss sent me back, me and George Economo, and we were to get rid of the explosives there were 2 igloos there that contained a lot of miscellaneous explosives that were used in construction and used for our various experiments. And he sent George and I down there, and we went down in a Jeep. This was well after Trinity. And we cleaned out those 2 bunkers and piled that stuff in a big pile and put a detonator in it. And we opened the hood of the Jeep and put the wires on the battery there and blew that. We had a pretty big explosion. We were just getting rid of that stuff. But it made a real nice ball of fire and a mushroom cloud. And but unfortunately, it also started the desert on fire. We had a big fire going. It was, but it didn't last long. Fortunately, it burned a lot of the sage or the mesquite. And
tell me a little bit more about this GI.
Well, then in a couple of weeks after Trinity, I hadn't had a furlough in a long time, and I was given one. And by the way, the lab really sort of, it didn't go out of existence, but everybody sort of ceased working after Trinity. The job was done, and everything was over, and we'd done our work, and people didn't even show up a lot at the lab, and the physicists all headed back for their universities, and a lot of the civilians were leaving, and we as GIs were just waiting for the point system that we had so that we could get out of the military. And I went to, my folks then lived in Duluth, Minnesota, and I went back to Duluth, and I just do not remember how this got in the newspaper, and but there it is, and it says GI expert is mum on atomic bomb. Okay, yeah, I was mum. It was still very difficult to talk about that since we had been many years being completely silent about what we did. So, what else do we have here,
That
Levinsky?
just gives me a little something to work with.
Okay.
Okay, why don't you take just a few seconds? Hold on. Okay, Ben, go ahead and do your tap.
Do it again.
A slower one, maybe?
Yeah, we'll do a slower one. Let me just let it. Okay, one more time, Ben.
Is that it? Or you want me to leave my finger there?
We'll do one more. Do the tap, but do a slower tap.
Is that enough movement for you now?
Yeah. Okay. That's perfect movement on you, Kevin. Then just reach in, tap it lightly twice, leave your finger there for just a second, then pull it out.
Watch
Yeah, you get your finger right over to
the
your picture.
Yeah, maybe.
So touch where it says Provost Marshal.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Ready? Something like that.
That's good. Hold that. Keep going, Kevin.
Okay. If we want to try one more, where you bring in your finger more laterally over the paper instead of from above.
Okay. So straight in like
five
this.
flat over here.
Oh, flat in, okay.
Go ahead. That was perfect.
Yeah, that looks like I had it in my pocket quite a while.
Okay, just keep talking.
Yeah, I want to show you my a special camera that we built at Sandy, and then I built one. I got one here at home. I'll show it to you. It's a sort of a horse race photo finish camera. I don't know whether you're familiar with those or not.
Yeah, I've seen those where the traveling
Film where the film moves.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, we built one to take pictures of rocket sleds on the track, where the rockets going Mach 2 or 3, and God, we got so we could take beautiful portrait pictures of those things.
Ben, reach over and tap the photo like you did before. Oh, the other hand.
Want to do it again?
Yeah,
Yeah,
give me
a little more
10
slowly.
wait for me, please. Give it about 10 seconds. Keep talking.
Yeah.
We're in mid-conversation.
Okay. Yeah, we were talking about all kinds of good things,
Okay.
none of which
now
I remember.
do your tap.
Is that all right?
That was good. I'm going to ask you to do just a tiny bit slower. And go ahead. Yeah. Okay. And, oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, we were
And
chatting away.
one more
And I'll come up here and tap this thing and take my hand away. That was beautiful.
That was
for my
great.
old wrinkled hand, but oh well.
Now tap in the middle of the card. You were a little to the side. Do it one more time, please. That's good. Bring your hand back. Okay, good. I think we got it.